Hello, listeners. It's Lisa Starr back with another episode of StarCast Podcast, where we talk all things important to the wellness industry. We're often talking about hard topics like measurables and management and how you pay people. But today we're going to take a step into the science, the brain science behind what we do. And we're so fortunate to be joined by Ari Peralta, who is a neuroscientist and sensory designer. Ari, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
We'll be talking about the science behind wellness, longevity, and where they meet with art and culture, and what we can do in spas and wellness businesses in order to maximize those benefits for guests that go beyond how they feel good when they've had a massage, right? But we really have to affect people's mental states. So we were very lucky to get Ari on board today. Thanks again for joining us. So Ari, tell us a little bit about your career journey into becoming a neuroscientist. How does one do that?
So for me, it's a very interesting journey. It's different than most neuroscientists who are either looking to become neurologists or psychologists and more on the medical field. For me, it came through the design field, and I was already an MBA. I was already working with fashion designers through sensory design, through the lens of our senses and how sensory design can impact us. I was introduced to neuroscientists, and the more I was introduced to the field, the more fascinated I became. The more questions I had, and that curiosity led to an opportunity, and I applied and got accepted at Harvard and completed the Brain Body Mind program there. And since then, have been working really on an evolutionary journey in my own career where I started really applying these to create experiences really focused on stimulation. And now really evolving to focused on how to help people regulate that stimulation.
That's a whole nother topic, right? I mean, one's getting stimulated, and then what do you do when you're overstimulated, which much of the population seems to be. I mean, is there anywhere where people are walking around without their heads in their devices, like just constantly getting images? That seems like the beginning of overstimulation to me.
I'll tell you where that place exists, Lisa, and it's the future. It's a
Wow.
place where the future of wellness really takes into consideration what wellness really means to a human being today and what it means to be human today. And, my research and my work has evolved from creating experiences that create a sense of awe and wonder to really creating practical solutions that help people in the moments they need them the most.
So that's where neuroscience comes in, right? Because you know how brains work.
Yes, that's where neuroscience comes in. Neuroscience is really the understanding, the science, the field of not just the brain, but our nervous system. And when we talk about overstimulation, when we talk about chronic stress, what we're really talking about is an issue that neuroscience can really support and help.
What specific neurological responses can we cultivate in guests, and how do we do that?
It's really a challenging question without the foundation of how we work.
So give us the foundation.
The first step that we do with clients and with brands that we support is really go and give them a basic understanding of our nervous system and a basic understanding of how our senses are pathways to our nervous system. Right now, there's a huge emphasis on vagus nerve research
Mhm.
because we know of the importance it has, the critical role it plays in regulating our parasympathetic system. So we start from that foundation first. Second, we try to understand what kind of population they're dealing with, right? And what are the concerns that population's dealing with in the environment in which they're coming from or looking to reset. This gives us a better understanding at what kind of dysregulation exists. Now, when we talk about our addictive relationships to technology, we know that that's creating an offset of issues with attention disorder, with sensory dysregulation, with sleep disorders. So you can already see the
Mhm.
amounting use cases that people are seeking in the wellness environment. And it's not too different from what people have been asking for a long time. I just think the science now has really advanced. And also, I think the general awareness of customers has really elevated the consciousness and education on how to look these things up and how to validate them as well.
Well, it's certainly true that our guests today are so much more knowledgeable in many ways, probably as a result of having their device in front of them. But they come in knowing things that they didn't know 10 or 15 years ago. They used to come in and have a massage, a facial, a body treatment, and just accept what was done. They didn't have an opinion about it. They didn't have a high expectation of the outcome that was very specific. And now, they want to know what's going to happen, how long will it take, what can I expect? Um, and there are certain, as you say, outcomes they're looking for. Everyone's looking for stress reduction. Like that's the world we've created. And that's good for us in spa. It's good when people want because we can deliver that. But we delivered it in a way that it was sort of a side effect, if you will, of what we were doing. And now I think we need to focus more and know more, but I'm not sure how wellness professionals can go about that.
Well, I think that we really have to rethink what the purpose of the spa is.
Okay.
And today, I think there's multiple purposes, and that can be confusing to a customer. And I think the most of us assume that a spa is a place where you get massages and probably facials and things like that. And we know that while they have their value, wellness has really expanded in definition and in application, especially its modalities. And I think spa in general as a category, it's been slow at adapting these modalities. And
Mhm.
I think it went more on the aesthetic side, but then it fell on limitations on the medical side and all that through that side. And it took a gamble with it. And I think that now it's pivoting, right, with more things like IV drops and
Mhm.
more on the biohacking side of it. But I think it's still lost. And I think that, spa is starting to happen outside of that environment that we call spa. And that's what's really exciting to me when the automobile becomes a spa, when your guest room becomes a spa, when your bathroom becomes a spa, which we're sealing with like brand partners like Kohler who are doing some amazing work creating some of those spa environments and benefits directly inside the home. So I think another point is accessibility. I think the idea that spa owners and spa managers need to make some of these new technologies more accessible. And I'm sure you could agree with this point, Lisa, but it- we see a lot of technology in the environments that we're involved with, a lot of them really effective, a lot of them really interesting. But when you start just placing them in a room, what makes one spa different from the other?
Nothing.
It doesn't. So this leads to the part of experience. Experience design is really going to be the unlocking factor that brings these elements in a cohesive way where it's no longer just programming design, it's experience design.
Well, I want to dive into that, but I want to go back to something you said, Ari, which is very true. What we're seeing is the expansion of that spa concept from being in a certain place in a facility, like you go here and you have the spa. It has come out, and we've seen how it's taken off in the last 10 years in particular. I've been in this field for, almost 4 decades, and it's changed a lot, all for the good. Um, spa was, as you say, very specific, having services, maybe some water treatments. And now it's all these things, all these new technologies, devices, sciences that help us better understand our body and create responses that we're looking for. And maybe it isn't in a certain room, it's, all over. And hence the merging of wellness and what we've seen from, as we know, the global Spa Summit became the Global Wellness Summit, right? It's all about wellness now. COVID accelerated that. People, consumers really want it. Um, and we're almost flat footed in trying to keep up, right? And go beyond what we traditionally knew how to do with our hands into, as you say, this wider sensory experience because there is a lot of sameness. There is a lot of sameness. And, my work as a spa consultant, I might work with a new client in a certain city and I look at the comp set for them and everyone is doing the same things, charging the same price, sometimes calling them the same thing. So why does a consumer choose one over the other? Which leads to your point of differentiation in the sensory design, creating experiential spaces that really, speak to the outcome you're looking for. So, how help us with that?
Yeah, and I think that's just the first step, Lisa. So that's where we started with clients, was really first helping them create a sensory identity that anchored them, differentiated them, and was a felt experience. But then from there, we apply neuroscience in many other ways, in particular in educating on the different modalities and therapies that could be complementary or beneficial or exponentially augment the benefit they already have from those traditional services. Part of what I think has been an issue with that evolution that you described that I'm so grateful for, because without those 40 years that you've put in, the 50 years that some other amazing women in particular have put in, we wouldn't have the building blocks to be able to design some of these things. What's been missing has been the intention to making this cohesively work, right? And this is where we get into longevity and probably 10 other buzzwords that will happen after that, where, we're trying to lead with marketing over leading with actually something that cohesively works. And we're a community. So it's about also how to support each other in a community of feedback loop. In particular, when we talk about research and science, most of the relationships that I hear about from my colleagues who also work with brands, which is not common, they don't hear from the brands after they're done with their contracts.
Mm.
We maintain relationships with our brands because it's that continuous feedback loop.
So you can keep fine tuning.
Not only so we can keep fine tuning or reiterating different aspects of the project, but so that we can continue to feed in the bowl of knowledge, the wisdom that we need to see not just the short term effects, but the longer term effects. And this goes back to the solutions that are creating more problems in today's world, including the technologies that we create and how we use them. So going back to the spa, it's reframing what the spa is for. And I know that if I say this to you, and I share this a lot with my spa friends, and they smile and they go, "You're right. Why wasn't a social wellness club inside a spa already?"
Why
We've
exactly?
seen it. We've seen aspects of it, elements of it. So innovation tends to flourish where it's cultivated.
Sure. You need an open mind. You need to be able to shift what you're doing. And that's a lot of work. People that work come in, your head down. This is what we do. This is how we do it. We know we've done it for years. This is how it works. And it is hard to shift gears, but it's not, impossible. And it's important that we are able to evolve along with our market or we're going to be left behind.
I think that's a great point, and nobody wants to be left behind, but at the same time, we do need to find better ways of appreciating and keeping the aspects of the wisdom that does work.
Mhm.
And I think that's what the new ones lack. So again, we have this dichotomy where we have this more traditional framework that's been challenging to evolve. And we have another framework that's so evolved, I think they're going to do it for robots instead of for humans soon.
Mm.
So I think the aspect of spa is the aspect of human touch, of human connection. And when we go back to that and sharing that wisdom, sharing that intimacy, sharing that connection, I think we go back to a root that can't be replaced by anything else.
It's true. The human connection is so important, and we're focused on that. We have so much technology at our fingertips now that we can use in spa and wellness environments, but it doesn't replace the human touch. It augments it. It provides another venue, another route, if you will, that might go with something else that was human touch. But I think they're going to coexist. I don't see one instead of the other. Human touch will always be crucial.
I think the biggest advice I can give spa owners and managers out there is the easiest way to evolve currently is just to take one small step. It's a big small step, and it's to go beyond the transactional services and think of what are the transitionary elements that connect those transactions, amplify those.
Hmm. I guess charting out your customer service delivery cycle, make a map and think about where are the moments where it is transactional. We know where they are. When the appointment is scheduled, when the client checks out. I mean, we do revert into sort of process driven behaviors then that aren't thinking about the experience for the guest. And, the recency factor of the guest walking out the door and the last thing they did was pay, which is not the pleasant part. And maybe there was a challenge with getting the payment right. And should I tip or shouldn't I? And that's what we leave them with. And I wish we could change that.
And there's a lot that we find in common when we sit in the waiting room, and we both have been on the other side as well. Right. And we see these people interact because of that, like pain or discomfort or reason why they're there, that gift that somebody gave them, etc. Spa is not taking advantage of those moments. Spa
Hmm.
is not leveraging those moments, transforming those moments into something deeper and richer. And when I mean think beyond the transaction, I'm talking about the social nights once a week
Hmm.
that brings these two friends that maybe just meet when they're at the spa together. And I think if we can learn something about what's happening with some of these new movements, it's that because of the hype of them, it's bringing people together. But they're also finding more cohesive ways to keeping them together. And I think spa needs to do that so that it can stay relevant. But now we need to understand what that relevancy is for. And I think if we boil it back down to this connection of people, but with this purpose of feeling better, I think we get down to a much more solid offering than today's, I think, hodgepodge. Let me see and experiment and test and kind of fail publicly with things that don't really match with the intention of trying to keep up with some of these trends.
There's that which causes it. And it's also, I believe, that we don't really know what our guests want because they don't really always know either. So some spas are just, let's try all these things and see what people like and what they come back for, but it doesn't feel cohesive.
I think you have a really interesting point. And in neuroscience, specifically in sensory neuroscience, this is something that we talk about a lot. I talk about congruence and how congruent something is or not, right? And what we're talking about is the gap between expectation and delivery. And today's expectation is quite high.
It's very high.
Today's delivery in spa, it's not that it's bad. It's just that relatively to how exponentially high the customer is, it becomes mediocre.
That's a really great point. It's true. They come in expecting so much because the media has hyped it up and they read so many things and they saw it on Instagram. And it's very difficult to live up to those kind of expectations.
It really is. But I think the point that you make on hyper focusing and standing for something, I think that's why some of those other new sector landscapes are growing so strongly because they are much more hyper focused. as you mentioned, when you walk into a spa, you're not really sure what you're going to do, or not all the time, right? Or as you mentioned, the spa operators may not know what the clients want. I think that's a lack of focus. I think that sounds like a lack of focus. So when you are anchored in a focus, I think that changes everything. And I think we're going to start seeing nervous system regulation become a anchored focus.
I love that. Let's talk more about the science, Ari, since you are a neuroscientist. How do we connect art and beauty and sensory experiences in our brains? Like what happens in the human brain when we have those options in front of us?
Well, that's a big question. So let's break that down a little bit. First of all, we have an innate biological evolutionary connection to beauty, to things we find beautiful. When we find things beautiful, they make us feel better.
Mhm.
And vice versa. When we feel good, things look better to us as well.
Mm.
So let's start with that basic foundation fact, neuroscience principle on neuroaesthetics. Neuroaesthetics refers to the neuroscience of aesthetics, and aesthetics really comes from this study of beauty. What's interesting is that back in the 1700s, aesthetics was also how the senses were described.
Oh,
So
really?
this is how we now start connecting all
Mm.
of these different fields. So now that we know that interconnected loop between beauty and wellness, then we go into the expansiveness of what art is, right? And I'm not here to define art. That's going to be a deep,
That's another podcast.
but it is the one of the most beautiful aspects of what human beings are. And over the past year, I've been finalizing my book and finally now in edit mode, where I really get deep into the beauty of what it makes, what it is to be human.
Mhm.
And I think that art is one of those pivots for us as a species. We are able to express ourselves. We're able to find a third space to communicate. And that communication isn't really bound by time and space the way we are. So it's one of those elements that, again, on a biological and evolutionary level, have a deep connection with us. Now, you integrate that into a moment of transformation, it doesn't take much to see the benefit. Now, the beauty is that there's a beautiful rise in research in the areas of neuroaesthetics. And some people like the incredible Susan Magsman at Mind Arts Lab, Johns Hopkins, who lead now the field of neuro arts. So now there's this new scientific push that's helping build back the evidence on what we already know innately, which is that art is good for us. What we're learning now through research is which modalities, through what kind of interventions, and how can they deepen certain types of neural connections that support quality of life and specific types of conditions like Alzheimer's.
So, beauty. We respond well to beauty. It makes us feel good. We feel good when we look beautiful. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, what's beautiful to you might be different than what's beautiful to me. How do we make sure we're hitting that note for our guests?
I think this is where technology can come and help. And it's not where it's helping today, but we have a case study where we need help. This is where technology can come and help and implement. I remember working for one of our clients, Kimball International. They are the largest furniture manufacturer, one of the largest in the country, in the U.S., supporting most hospitals and other kind of care environments. Now, I believe even workplace and sorry, hospitality. And we were supporting them with neural research on how to create places to belong. And it goes to show how even manufacturers are interested in applying neuroscience insights to creating better products, or in this case, ranges in better ways of implementing and helping support the need for people to go back to work. Where fun and play weren't significant enough, right? We ran out of this open concept, fun and play. That wasn't enough to bring people back. What did people actually need? And by applying sensory research into different research strategies and talking to over 1,000 people in their different kind of work aspects or work ratios and better understanding, they had sensory personalities. They had sensory personalities.
Did they
And
know what they were, their sensory personality?
of
No.
course, of course. And, by us being able to understand what those different preferences were, we were able to then start in grouping those categories of preferences.
Mhm.
And we would look at things like privacy, noise. So, not your typical like smell preferences, but we were look at really what are these people's triggers so that we can avoid those, first of all.
Mhm.
Second, what are these people's soothers so that we can provide the soothing kind of regulation through texture, through form, through height, through firmness that they needed in those moments. And this is a whole new language that most designers and most spa people in particular, we're not really talking about that yet.
No, no, we're not. And I think it's important to know if there are specific neurological responses, like helping someone to feel calm or more focused, that are more relevant to them and to the whole concept of wellness as we move into the longevity push, right? What is it that helps longevity science? What responses should we be trying to elicit and guess, or is it on a case by case basis?
It's both. It's first having the awareness of how it works. Again, back to the foundation of knowledge.
Mhm.
So you asked a brilliant question that I wanted a complete answering in the previous one, which is okay. So what framework did you apply? And this was what's interesting. I had done some research on sensory dysregulation and really looking at different measurement tools that were being used in communities like autism. And when I started looking at one model in particular, the Dunn model, I was fascinated by how I could potentially update this framework and adapt it to spa and wellness and really make it connect with any brand, regardless of what they do, because they're dealing with human beings. Right. And this is the beauty of neuroscience. When you integrate applied neuroscience into any field, the reason we can say it can be applied to any field is because there's human beings involved. So in this case, we were looking at two parameters. One parameter was your ability to receive sensory information, right? So when we talk about the senses, typically we refer to them through our organs, right? Through organ senses, our ears, our tongue, et cetera, our eyes. But when, as neuroscientists, when we talk about the senses, we mostly talk about sensory signals, right? And we have different types of sensory receptors that can receive and interpret light, for example, or vibration, or temperature, or pressure, or movement, etc. The first parameter on this framework was understanding how much information can you receive. So, how much information can that antenna receive?
Mhm.
The next parameter is how much information can you process,
Which is different than just receiving it. Sure.
which is different than just receiving it. So and this is very into the science. So sorry for your
No, I
designers
love
that are
this.
listening to this. But again, when you understand this foundation, science is not meant to make you doubt it, especially when it's about human beings, because you are a human being. It's about validating, you know what? That makes sense. And this makes sense. The fact that we receive information and process information differently. So now, Lisa, when you ask me about how do we take into account those differences, these are the two parameters we need to look at. How well do they process information? And
Mhm.
how well do they receive that information? Now, when we look at the spectrum and when we look at the term neurodiversity, I can be controversial at times because I think we're all neurodiverse when I look at it through the lens of this framework, right? Because, and here's the interesting part, we can have a bit different scales of amplitude of ability to receive signals from a particular receptor. So that's why sometimes we're more sensitive to sounds over light or vice versa, or to scent, etc. So this gives you a better understanding as to how we were able to group these almost four different categories of people that either had these high thresholds of information that they could accept a lot of stimulation and they could process a lot of stimulation and keep going without a nervous system fallout. What was interesting was that there were three other groups, and the majority of people are in these three other groups. Yet most places we design today, including spas, are focused on one group, overstimulation, the ones that can handle it well.
So, how do we correct that?
Well, I think that's part of where the conversation, as you said in your in your last question, around technology. I think this is where technology has an amazing use case to helping us collect this information, identify this information, and personalize environments for this information.
Do we run the risk of oversimplifying neuroscience in our wellness marketing if we talk about it when we're not scientists? That be something that we are aware of and steer around that?
I think so. I think so. And I've seen this happen a lot recently where suddenly there's a lot of neuroscience experts.
Mhm.
And I think that we need to understand what neuroscience means. And we talked about how what it means from a foundational science a field level. But it's interesting to understand that neuroscience also has expanded into so many different fields,
Mm.
right? We see neuroscience applied to architecture. We see neuroscience applied to marketing. We see neuroscience applied to a variety of fields, including design. So I think it's important to always be in conversation when you talk about neuroscience and ensure that that conversation is with neuroscientists. Now, we're lucky that we sit in this bridge where we're in between neuroscientists that are academic neuroscientists back at my alma mater at either at Harvard or our friends at Oxford University who we work with a lot or locally here closer Stanford, where we build academic relationships. Why? Because it starts with the research question, and if there's no bridge between what's happening in spa or what's happening in wellness and what the researchers are looking for and asking and getting funding for or requesting funding for, then how are we going to expect to get these insights?
We're not.
So we've worked as a bridge between those two communities where we understand neuroscience by profession but really become more brokers of research and help facilitate and evolve wellness from a watered down version of of science where it began, let's say,
Mm.
to a much more rigorous. And rigorous doesn't just mean that it has a few scientific papers, right? Rigorous means that it creates effective results, effective measurable results. And I think that's the other part that we're going to start seeing fade away with some of these other sectors, which are exciting now, but they're not all rigorous. So a lot of the evidence, it's just going to fall short. And I think that it's not something that SPA can just be like, oh yeah, we told you so. It's an opportunity for SPA to pick some of these elements up. And I think it's an interesting conversation when we sit down with spa operators and spa owners, and in particular, the conglomerates that own them. I feel like they're chasing their tails.
Mm.
They're trying to react to the latest trend. And by the time they implement that, which takes a while, there's something else to take its
Mhm.
place. And it's only getting faster. That cycle's only getting faster. So it's going to be interesting to see how people like you and other, I think, for people at the forefront of spa really create a conversation where it's about reframing that question of what is spa for and aligning those services, those products, that programming and the environment to reflect that.
Well, this work that you're doing at the Cocoon Research Wellness Institute is so important to bridge that gap, as you say, applying academic standards and the rigor of that to what happens in the field. Because sometimes I know in science it can take years for these developments to become clear to the layman. And, we don't have years. We need to People need help now, and we need to be sure that we are providing that we're headed in the right direction. Ari,
If
I'd
it's
like
about seeking answers in science, we're always going to lead to that. But if it's about seeking guidance and collaboration to finding those answers together, that becomes something else. And I think today it's been all about the silos. And what's changing is that it's becoming more collaborative, more more transparent, and thanks to technology, more in real life.
which is where we live, IRL. Ari, can we talk for a moment about sensory design, as that is one of your fields, and what how does it differ from traditional design? What would sort of be the hallmarks of sensory design?
Well, sensory design focuses not just on the identification of different sensory fields or sensory receptors, in this case, as a neuroscientist, um, but it also focuses on the integration. And that's the most important part. So when we talk about sensory recipes of any kind, we're talking about how cohesive or not they are. So when we talked about the congruence earlier of the spa experience, or in this case, the incongruence with the expectation being up here and the delivery being here, that discrepancy, that's what creates a bad experience. That discrepancy with the senses is what can create a headache or somebody from turning away from the spa
Mm.
to begin with, right? So when we look at sensory design, we have a particular lens of looking at each sensory field and then looking at what weaves them together. And when we think of stories, I think, or when we think of, sorry, wellness design, we don't often talk about stories. We almost think about checklists.
Mhm.
And we've been able to help evolve the conversation from the sensory checklist to what kind of stories do you want to tell? What are those peak moments? And to ensure that you have these supportive sensory anchors to support those peak moments. Now, why does that make a difference? Because when we focus design through the senses, we're speaking the language our body speaks. We're speaking the language our psychology speaks. And it's the receptors that are out there, right? So suddenly, by implementing scent maps or olfactory maps, by implementing texture maps, and other, let's say, layers of what's already there, but really applying a different way of organizing and working with it, it elevates any experience. One of the things that we found in our research with Kimball International, for example, was that each of these different sensory categories of people, right, the four different main categories, they had very similar preferences. That's how we were able to really group them. Yes, they had very similar preferences. So there is a need now to delve more into the research on why do they have those
Mm.
preferences. And this is where, a lot of people in wellness have an opportunity to be educated, at least through your incredible podcast, because, it's easy for us all to say, hey, it takes years in the lab and feel so disconnected from that. I want to talk about why that happens and separate what correlation, causation, because sometimes they're intermixed as one thing. Now, at the lab and in the different research studies that we've done and that others do, it's easy to establish correlations. It's easy to establish, oh yeah, there's a connection there. But to create a established evidence for causation, you have to almost eliminate all the other possibilities. And that takes much more time.
Mhm.
And today, we're not even at correlation. We're like by proxy. So I think this
So
is where we need to evolve and also use technology to help us advance. I can see technology helping us advance the causation aspect just as much as correlation, but help us as an industry go back into cause and effect, not related and could maybe possibly do something.
do we need to be careful, Ari, about sensory environments, multi-sensory environments? Is there such a thing as too much sensory? I mean, do we risk overwhelming the guest, or is it very helpful to connect to memory formation through the senses when we have these sensory touch points?
I think it's a trick question. And I'll tell you why. Because they're both true. Both those statements and questions are true. I think that today we are overstimulated to begin with. So it's important to understand where the baseline is. Regardless of what your spa looks like, where's the baseline? And part of what I notice, and I'm sure you'll laugh at this, Lisa, it's the shock, almost like a heat shock that when you go in or you go out of a spa, because there's no kind of landing space in
Hmm.
between.
Right. It's very sudden.
It's very sudden. And it's these kind of things that really can make a difference. Now, to answer your question, yes, certain things are overstimulating and they may not be the design elements you intended for.
Mm.
Sometimes there are things like HVAC and alarm systems and
Mhm.
other byproduct noises of machines or equipment, etc. So it's important to not only have that intention of that multisensory calming or relaxation vibe, if you will, but it's also important to take into account other things that are just already there.
Very much so. Okay, that's a good point. I'm curious if you, in your travels around the world, have come across any places that really stand out as a really good integration of neuroscience with culture and wellness.
Well, I think we're starting to see this pop up around the world. And for the past year or so, I've been focusing a lot of my research at the intersection of neuroscience, art, and wellness, and really looking at the aspect of culture. Back to our conversation on social wellness, looking at this aspect of culture and how it's the glue, the driving force for all of this. And what I'm starting to see is where social wellness clubs are going. I think that today we're seeing the shift into farm and all that, and we're starting to
Mhm.
see those examples pop out everywhere. But I think the future of social wellness is going to be found right now in galleries. So you're going to see that in art galleries, and art is going to play a very interesting role at bringing culture together. Why? Because usually it brings, again, a medium, a collective it brings a medium force that people can identify and communicate through. And I think that we're starting to see brands integrate art in a way much more than just static curation as it's been done, let's say, since the inception of hospitality. It's starting to become much more immersive. It's starting to become much more purposeful in terms of having some kind of wellness outcome once you're completed the experience. But sometimes I've also seen some of these elements make it into the spa. And I think that there's a lot of brands experimenting right now with how to create sensory atmospherics inside their facilities. So, not just talking about the quality of light, but create actual rays of sunshine, create actual fog and steam and other sensory elements that enhance the experience. So, I think, to answer your question, we see brands that are mixing some of these elements, and we see some of them that are really winning on the culinary side. But what I'm mostly interested in is really the wellness communities that are starting to apply this. And at the Cocoon Wellness Research Institute, we build wellness communities. So for us, it's important to apply this research, to test this research out there, and then really implement this research into our facilities, into our buildings, into our program. I think a big message that, we're learning along the way is, there's no destination to wellness. It's an ongoing journey, and
Right. It's
SPA's
not.
known that for a long time. So part of what's been really humbling for me as a neuroscientist and professionally trained sensory designer it's been just to learn a little bit from those that have been there before me. And I think there's so many lessons when you look backwards towards spa. But what's really challenging has been helping spa look forward and not be saturated with the daily or the weekly technology that's going to transform spa. Again, I think when we look at technology from a point of helping us solve a problem, it really reframes how we look at technology. So with spa, I think again, it's really about asking those deep questions. What is spa today? What is it
Mhm.
for? And what do we do to provide that outcome?
So fascinating. I could listen to you for hours. It sounds like you believe that more personalized neuroadaptive environments that individuals respond to will become more of a norm in design.
I think we're starting to see it. And I think that we have a responsibility with ensuring that these technologies don't evade our privacy, that these technologies don't commodify what it is to be human, et cetera. So I think that, there is this responsibility. We can't just say, yes, the future of this is going to be that. But I do think that we're going to start seeing less screen, less device, less hardware, less things between us and what we're seeking technology for. I think that's evident with everything that's happening. But it's important at this moment, at this crossroad of exponential evolution, in particular with AI, to go back and ask ourselves what it means to be human.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
Through the foundation blocks of those answers, especially those answers that really fill us, build on those. Because we're creating a world that I'm afraid is celebrating temporary, celebrating illusion, celebrating accelerated nonsense,
Mhm.
um, over celebrating truth. And I think that one of the things that I've always known about spa to be true is the sense of calm,
Mm.
the sense of calm. The outside may be crazy, but here is that calming space. And I think that as we build towards what is spa in the next 10 years, let's not steer away from that foundational truth by bringing in other things that may take away or compete with that. And if we've learned anything in this podcast, it's that when things compete and don't complement in the brain, they create conflict. And that conflict creates rejection. That conflict creates biological responses. And people are different. Yes, they can be categorized, but people are different. That said, most people will react in an avoidance kind of way.
Mm. Okay, good. That's good to know. Um, I'm going to ask you one last question, which I feel I would be remiss in not asking a neuroscientist about AI and how AI or brain-based data might influence the future design of wellness destinations.
This is a very relevant and important topic for me. It even changed the course of my book. I was, I think, on chapter 4 or 5, writing on future diseases and researching on what are the future neurological implications of the kinds of technologies that we're starting to hear about or design. It was so frightening. I had to go back and change the book from a frame of architects and designers to a frame of human species. This is a deep conversation, Lisa. And, as a neuroscientist who works particularly with sensory design, I have this, and in wellness on top of that, I
Mhm.
have this unique seat, as do you, from your profession and type of work and industry work that you're in. I have this unique seat of seeing the advances of what's happening in research, the advances of what's happening in technology, and the dysregulation that's happening with human beings at a level that it's difficult to even comprehend because everything's happening so quickly and we're so distracted, right? So part of the issue that I have with AI or with any technology is not the AI or the technology itself. The issue that I have is our sense of exploitation that we're embedding into everything that we create. And now we're creating things that can really apply that exploitation back to us. So going back to your question on, this bridge that we haven't crossed yet, or we're not, but we're getting close. And how do we find security and safety when we're talking about neuro devices? And I think that's a deep ethical conversation to have. That said, I do think that, we are having this conversation because we are really stressed out. We are not sleeping well. We're not digesting well. We're now having hormonal and other reproductive issues. The list continues. But if we're going to be talking about wellness, let's talk about what these crippling issues have been. And the underlying common denominator of most of these issues is chronic stress. And that, a big contribution of that chronic stress is our overstimulation. So, and we're part of that. We can't just blame that on technology.
No, no, it's self induced. Put the device down, but we can't do it.
So that's where I also think art plays this role in helping us put that down and go into that other space to reflect and calm down. We need to understand, and again, as we define things for ourselves as a species, literally, AI is a whole nother world that we have to be very careful at spa. And I don't say careful in this negative mindset. I say careful in this intentional mindset. We have to be very intentional on what we bring technology into the spa for. And I think in the past, what you've seen is this disconnect with the customer when that intent has been blurry.
Sure, that makes sense too. I think that we have to be very careful. Of course, we have to move forward, but it's also unknown. We love AI sometimes and what it can do, but beware, right? Having your own things recited back to you, regurgitated to you. We do have to step away. It's sort of, Ari, the path forward is like having the tech, using it to advantage, but not forgetting, as we've said throughout this conversation about humanity, walking that parallel path, one foot in the human world and one foot in the tech world is difficult to do. I'm fascinated that I see some countries, Switzerland, some of the Baltic countries, are prescribing art for mental stress reduction. Like they're telling people go to a museum, walk around and look at the art as a way to reduce stress in your life. I love that.
We're seeing significant research, the impact of the research come out on people with dementia, youth in urban areas, which Cocoon invests in right now through a project called Indivisible Arts. And, it's been really interesting to be able to mix the arts and wellness, and see it come to life in community and seeing how that brings people together. And again, it's not that, okay, you just plant it there and it brings people together. But I think a lot of what we forget about in wellness and spa is that we don't do, we facilitate. We facilitate wellness. We facilitate spa. And I think when we go back to these principles of who we are and what we do, it kind of reinforces the column and the foundation of what the essence of all this is for. And again, it allows for more clarity on what's next. I think there's an exciting time for the world of spa, in particular, in this sense of sensory refuge. I think there's an exciting time. And I know that some spas played with technologies around sensory deprivation tanks and things like that. But I think, again, if we take that to another level and with a different intention, I think the future of spas are these different types of sensory refuges, that just exist just to help you exist. And I think it's been doing it for a long time. It's just going to be doing it in a different and hopefully more effective way by being even simpler. And I think that's the complexity of the innovation in your industry, Lisa, that it almost has to devolve a little bit before it can evolve again.
I love that idea of simplicity. We do need simplicity in our life. Everything is so complex and so layered, and it's hard for the brain. It is to process everything and take it in. So stepping away for that walk outside becomes even more important. Ari, it's been a fascinating conversation. We're so lucky you joined us. I want to repeat your title, Director of Innovation for Cocoon Wellness Research Institute. Your book is coming out, you mentioned. Tell us more, when and where.
So we're thinking summer. It's going through the editing process, and I'm being very transparent about this process because I didn't expect to write a book about how to be human,
What did you expect to write a book about?
about sensory design for architects and designers,
Mm-hmm.
and the neuroscience behind it. But again, when I face the reality of what my clients are trying to solve as brands, when I face the reality of what governments are facing with exponential advancements of technologies they don't understand, and when I look back at, forget customers, I don't even use the word users, right? But when I look at the humans in my own life, including myself, and reflect on the overstimulation, on how difficult it is to regulate my own self each day, or how much more difficult it's become than previous years, and we're lucky that we didn't grow up with these devices.
Oh,
But imagine now our children and our children's children who are dysregulated from a foundational perspective, right? From the point that they're growing up, their brain is evolving still as they're growing up. It's still growing and making these connections with a completely dysregulated emotional system, right? So here we are at this crossroads where we're creating technology that's almost going to, looks like, substitute us. In the meantime, we're very distracted and overstimulated. And it seems that, this is creating consequential health determinants that we need wellness for. It's not the typical diseases that we're talking about anymore. And these are all leading to those diseases anyways. So I think we're at this interesting crossroads of, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And what are we doing it for? What's the outcome of all of this?
you're so right about that. We have all this technology that does really cool things. And when you look at it, sometimes you say, I didn't know something did that, nor did I know I needed it. And I probably don't, but cool that it does it. Technology in search of a purpose, if you will. It's gotten a little bit out of control. But I'm reminded of how many lectures I've been in over the years from doctors talking about lifestyle diseases and how they're controllable if we ate right and we exercised and we don't smoke and we sleep right. We'll get rid of 80% of disease in the world. And now, so we're focused on that. And yet we've got our phone in our hand 24/7. And this is another self-induced negative outcome.
Oh yeah, it's only increasing our chronic stress. So something I was having a casual conversation with some friends the other day was maybe out of six of us, four said they couldn't sit through a movie anymore, a full movie. Yeah. And we then started talking about this idea of content and size and length and duration of that content. And again, these are really deep questions that we really need to start asking ourselves as we start creating these environments. And when we talk about the spa, I just want you to think of one thing, Lisa. Forget the space, forget the person, forget the design, just the spa menu. Think of how overwhelming a spa menu can be. Now, let's think of that baseline that you just described of overstimulated, overwhelmed, just got out of crazy traffic, looking for parking, finally gets there. And, so this idea of sensory design and this idea of implementing neuroscience to inform and back up the decisions based on those insights, it's about really having the intention of every single moment and interaction that's done there to be playing a supporting role in that outcome of calm. And while calm may mean something different to everyone, at the end of the day, there is a biological common denominator And that's not something preferences can outrun.
Okay, good. That's good to know. Calm is a state that we can all reach. It may be a different state in us, but we all can reach a state of calm.
Looks the same. Overstimulated looks the same. The fact that we get there at different speeds, that's what makes us different.
Uh-huh.
But but these states are the same. These states are exactly the same. The fact that, someone on one side of the spectrum might get there way faster because they can sense those receptors in a faster way. That's the difference. But we're all in this together. And I think that as humans, it's important to look at the sensory system as a language. It's our biological language. So when I talk to customers and ask them, for example, what kind of texture do you seek in moments of stress? These are the kind of deeper conversations that we're having around design that allow us to unlock very simple nudges that support us in those moments. And as you well know, you know, wellness can't be achieved inside a spa room. Wellness can be achieved outside of the spa room and not while you're getting a treatment or a therapy or at a retreat or this or that, right? It's going to happen when you're dysregulated and you need to regulate yourself back.
Mm.
That's when wellness happens, right? It's the same with meditation. That's not going to bring balance to your life. But now, what you learn during meditation will allow you to bounce back off the
Mm.
situations that throw you off balance. So, we also need to understand how to build that bridge of we know spa's going everywhere. Why isn't spa taking us?
Right. That's a really great point. Well, we need to take us, right? We need to use the tools at our disposal to take ourselves to that place where we know we should be. Fascinating. Well, Ari, thank you again for your time. Ari Peralta, Director of Innovation, as you can tell, he's a very innovative guy. So interesting. Does your book have a title?
Not one that I can share yet.
Okay. Well, Ari Peralta, your book will be out this summer. We'll look for it, and thank you again for joining us here on Starcast. It was a really, really inspiring conversation.
Thank you.